All right, well, as you can see, we're the Watkins family. On the next slide, it'll show that some updated pictures of our kids. So there's Nathan and Tyler and Hannah and Ezra. Nathan is now just finished 4th grade. He is 10 years old, and Tyler's 8, just finished 2nd grade. Hannah is 6, and Ezra is 4. So for a little bit of background on me, I grew up in West Africa. Many of you guys know us personally, but I'll cover some of the background anyway. I grew up in Ivory Coast, West Africa, and my parents were missionaries initially in Liberia, and that's actually where my dad was born and raised. And so the picture up on the top right is of my grandparents, Chick and Joan Watkins. And my grandfather had a big impact on my life. You can go to the next slide as well. And so that's them earlier in my parents' ministry in Liberia. And then up in the corner, you can see, it's probably hard to see from here, but that's kind of the quintessential missionary photo. Baby in a diaper and a chimpanzee in the basket on the back of the motorcycle. But I was in a missions conference with my grandfather when I was about 8 years old, and he shared the gospel, and he shared the need for reaching those overseas with the gospel, and asked if there was anybody who felt the Lord might be leading them to serve. Well, I didn't go forward or say anything, but afterwards, I went up, took him by the hand, and I wandered through the church till I found a empty room, closed the door and locked the door, and then said, I think God wants me to serve him as a missionary. And so that decision really shaped my decisions going forward in terms of who I would date, where I went to school, and what I wanted to do. And the Lord really used my time growing up in Africa to reaffirm that calling on my life. Over and over again, I saw just the tremendous spiritual need that there was overseas. You can go to the next slide. So just a few pictures of how it was for me growing up. It was really a wonderful experience, and that was thanks in large part to my parents. My dad was always very intentional about incorporating us into the ministry, and so he didn't sacrifice his family for the sake of ministry. He actually incorporated us into it and really instilled in us a desire to see the lost come to Christ. You can go on to the next slide. My wife, Jackie, was raised in Brownsburg, Indiana. My parents, and you can go ahead one more, my parents moved to Indiana because my dad, he was an airplane mechanic and pilot, but he was, the mission in Africa had raised funds for a helicopter, so he was going to get his helicopter pilot's license. And so they moved to Indiana to do that training, ended up at Bethesda Baptist Church. That was our sending church. And Jackie's grandfather was the longtime pastor there. And so our families were friends early on. That picture at the bottom center is me at Jackie's baby shower. So it wasn't quite an arranged marriage, but pretty close. We started dating in high school and got married in college, and then, long story short, after we got married, we moved to the UK in 2007 and ended up serving we went there to serve in a small church and help with children's ministry, and we ended up working in Word of Life camps and VBSs all around the UK. You can go forward one more. And then go ahead and advance one more. And so when we came back to the U.S., we were trying to figure out where to finish up my undergrad. I ended up getting a job at Liberty, and that paid for Jack and I to finish our degrees. And while here, we ended up at Forest. And we were here at Forest for just about right at 10 years. And it was a really formative experience. We had such a great experience leading the graduates and professionals class. But I really can't articulate the impact that Forest had on our life. Our time here, Tyler's teaching especially, really impressed on us the centrality of the local church in God's mission. And we also learned how sweet Christian community can be. Most of our time here, we didn't have family in town, but Forest really was our family, and we can never replace that time of building close relationships with other people and other couples going through, having kids and raising kids at that young age. So it was just a huge blessing, and I want to make a point of pointing that out. We also learned so much about ministry here, working with the graduates and professionals and teaching Sunday school, and most importantly for our future ministry, learning how to open up our home and be hospitable and welcome people in. And since you all know, the Rainies were an instrumental part of that. They modeled that so well for us. And just something Marilyn had said at one point was basically you can only have people over when you have a perfect house, and you'll basically never have people over, or you're going to open up and let people see kind of your real life. And so we tried to take that to heart, and really helped us change how we viewed hospitality and ministry. And that's going to be a huge part of the ministry in Thailand, because the Thai people are very relational. And so in terms of opening up opportunities for the gospel, that's going to be through that hospitality. And so we're so thankful for that, for the way the Lord used that. Well, another aspect of the ministry that I saw growing up was that very often when pastors got to the point where they wanted more training than like a Bible Institute level, there weren't a lot of options on the field, and so very often they would come to the U.S. or go to Europe for more training, and maybe while there they started having kids, and it's very hard to go from that and come back to the bush and pastor. And so I saw the need to be able to provide more advanced training for pastors on the field. So I wanted to go to seminary, but just the situation of life here, didn't seem like I was ever going to get over the hump of doing that. And so we finally took the plunge and moved to Indiana. And there's a lot to this, but we just saw the Lord work in really amazing ways. We initially, when we moved, were planning to go to the Trinity Extension that was meeting in Indianapolis. The week we moved up there, Trinity changed their strategy and closed down most of their extension sites. But we had seen the Lord working, and we said, well, that must just not be his plan, but we didn't know what his plan was. And he ended up opening doors for me to get into an MDiv program that went year-round for 3 years, and so I was able to finish in 3 years. And then last summer, we joined our mission board, ABWE. You can go ahead and move forward to the next slide. ABWE stands for Association of Baptists for World Evangelism. The board is almost 100 years old. We have about 1,000 missionaries in 85 countries. And ABW's vision is to fulfill the Great Commission by planting churches and multiplying leaders and missions movements among every people. There are over 6,400 unreached people groups in the world. And our goal is to see biblical churches planted among those unreached groups, and then to see them ultimately multiplying beyond their own borders. So I'll touch on this a little bit because, spending a lot of time here at Forest, we did most of our missions through the IMB. And so just to kind of give a little background, ABW and the IMB would be doctrinally very, very similar. It's mostly just a funding model that's a little bit different. So when you join or accepted as a missionary with the IMB, you have a salary and you are more or less employed through the IMB. With ABW, we're supported directly by churches and individuals who, want to get behind our calling and vision individually. Excuse me. And so there's some obvious advantages to the IMB model. It's much easier to get to the field at times, but we also see some of the advantages of this model is that we have pretty tight connections with multiple churches, and our churches also have a little more hands-on role in terms of our ministry, where we serve, and then even down the road, God forbid that there's issues with accountability or discipline, our churches would be more directly involved in that as well. And so our sending church is College Park Church in Indianapolis, Indiana, and our missions pastor was really instrumental in kind of pointing us towards Thailand, Because at the time, I was thinking about, Jackie and I had been thinking about Ukraine really for a couple years. Jackie had been working on Ukrainian, and I had been having lunch with him pretty regularly, and I would mention Ukraine, and he was never like against it, but was kind of cool on the idea. I was picking up on that. So I asked him at one point, I said, you don't seem too big on this, on us going to Ukraine. And he said, well, here's the thing. We support the seminary in Ukraine. They're putting out 40 or 50 MDiv students a year. They know the language, they know the culture. He said, it's not that there's not need, but there's all these graduates going out, and what would you do better than, what would you be better equipped to do than they are? And I said, well, fair enough. So we looked at that as the Lord leading in our lives, and asking him, well, where would you like us to, we want to make sure that what we're doing is in line with the vision of our local church for missions. And so how would you encourage us to look? And he said, well, I would rather you focus on places that are so unreached that the national church just really isn't capable of furthering the work within their country. And so that started us looking, and he said, the reality is most of those areas are in Asia. And so we started looking. We looked at like the Joshua Project and some of these other missiology groups that do like demographics, and we kept seeing that Thailand was one of the least reached areas in Asia. And we were kind of confused at first because we had known a number of missionaries in Thailand, and so we had thought, well, like maybe there's just the work's just getting going or something. But as we dug into it, what happens is because Thailand is open and they have constitutional religious freedom, you can base there. And so what happens is a lot of mission organizations, they have regional hubs, and they use that as a launching point to go out and reach other countries throughout Asia, which is a great thing, but it means that it's kind of deceiving if you just look at the numbers and see, okay, there's 5,000 or 8,000 missionaries in Thailand when 80% of those are not doing Thai ministry. And so we ended up realizing there's actually still just a tremendous need for missionary help in Thailand, focused specifically on the Thai people. So if you're like me, when you hear Thailand, you may not know the difference between Thailand and Taiwan. And so we'll start with a little bit of a geography lesson. Taiwan is off the coast of China, not highlighted on the map, but Thailand is right there kind of in the center between Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia. It's situated there in Southeast Asia. You can go to the next slide. So that if you superimpose Thailand over the US, that's how it kind of lines up. So it's actually a pretty large country. There's 70 million people in Thailand. And the region that we're going to is called Isan. So can you go back one? It's kind of that eastern lobe of the upper part of the country. And it's about the size of Ohio, and there are about 20 million people in that region. And they're ethnically related to the Lao people. So about 250 years ago, during some strife and unrest, a lot of people came out of the mountains of Laos and migrated across the river and settled in that region. And then when national boundaries were kind of drawn or firmed up the way they are now, they're now part of Thailand. So that region is ethnically Lao, but they go by Thai Isan, which essentially means northeast. And so that's where we'll be serving. You can go on to the next slide now. So there's 70 million people in Thailand. They have a king. It's a constitutional monarchy, and so he's mostly a figurehead, but there's a lot of veneration for the king, and there are actually laws saying that you can't criticize the king, criticize the royal family. They even expanded it in, I think, 2019 to cover his pets, so you can't criticize the king's dogs, or you can face up to 35 years in prison. So even though he's a figurehead, it can be very serious, which leaves us a little worried about Tyler. Not this Tyler, but our Tyler. Thailand there's a high sense of social hierarchy, And I'll have a video next that just kind of gives a couple minute rundown of what that means, because it's really quite foreign to our way of interacting. And it's also an honor-shame culture. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about when I say honor-shame culture. So sociologists tend to divide cultures into three groups, and elements of these affect most cultures. So it's not strictly one or the other, but one or the other tends to predominate in given regions. So you have guilt innocence, which tends to be more prominent in the West. You have honor shame, and then you have fear power. Fear power tends to be more prominent in like animistic tribal people groups, where there's a lot of fear of spirits, demons, and they're trying to gain power over these forces, through sacrifices or trinkets or whatever else to gain some of that power. Well, in an honor-shame culture, morality and ethics are really defined by how it situates you with the rest of your peers in your culture and how they see you. And so it's all about, you hear things about saving face, and it leads to people being quite indirect. And so there's a lot of cultural differences as we go over there that we'll have to adjust to in how we interact, because in the US, if you sin, you do something wrong, you break a law, we have this sense of guilt that I have broken this and I need to pay a penalty for it. But more or less, if you pay your penalty, you pay your debt to society, it's over and you can move forward. One of the best ways I've actually heard it described that resonates, I think, with Americans is think back to high school. The idea of wearing the wrong fashions and being shamed for that. And think too about reputation. Once you lose that, there's mostly no coming back from it. And so people live in intense fear of doing anything that would change their standing in society, because this is not something that's reserved for teenagers. It's a way that morality is enforced throughout society. So you can see that's quite different to how we interact. I mean, we are often aware of status and standing, but if anything, we try to suppress that. So if we feel these instincts to buddy up to somebody because of their status, that's seen as a negative thing in our culture. And so, and you can imagine that this affects how you do ministry with people. Even the idea, he mentioned that if somebody in your extended family loses face, that doesn't just affect them, it affects the whole family. And so that's one of the barriers to the gospel going forward, is that if I accept Christ as a Thai person, that's in effect a rejection of my parents and my grandparents, and it brings dishonor on them. It's not just me. And so these dynamics really make it difficult to share the gospel in Thailand. So the area that we're targeting is called Isan. It's about a third of the country, but it only produces about a third of the economic output. So it's 85% of the people work in agriculture, and it's very unreliable. So it's prone to famine and to floods and drought, and so it's economically quite depressed. Household income is about $7 a day in this region, and so all of Thailand is very unreached and very needy spiritually, but this region especially has the fewest churches, has the fewest believers, and in part I think that's because it's hard for the church to do church plants within that region, because it's very hard to be a bivocational pastor and earn a living and start a church. Given the economic circumstances and then other aspects of the culture, this is also sadly a source of a lot of human trafficking. You can go ahead and step forward one more. So I've already touched on this, but why Thailand? Well, Thailand as a whole is about 0.5% evangelical. And within that group, within these numbers, we're also talking about some social gospel, prosperity gospel type denominations. So we're not necessarily saying this is the number of true born again believers. Within the Isan region, it's even lower. It's about 0.1%. So out of those 20 million people in this area the size of Ohio, there are fewer Christians, just self-identified of any denomination, than there are Baptists in Lynchburg and Bedford combined. Just to give you an idea, if that's all the believers in in a population of 20 million people, you can imagine how diffuse that would be. The gospel is just, it's very, very limited in terms of how many churches. And it's kind of laid out in a lot of ways. Isan, you have about 4 large cities, and by large, we mean about 200,000 people. And so beyond that, it's almost all small towns of about 20, 30,000 people. And so you can go between these towns for hours without seeing any church or any gospel witness. I can move forward. And because of the way their ethical system works, and the people being Buddhist, they give a lot. They're trying to earn good karma so that they can be reincarnated at a better, higher level of existence. And so everywhere you go within Thailand, there are these temples with magnificent statues and just gorgeous temples, despite the poverty. You can step forward one more, just some more examples of these temples. And it's pretty routine for young people to do a stint as, they call it a novice, but kind of like a monk, or they really function more as like assistants, but they spend a time going through like a monastic lifestyle, and that's pretty much universal, that most young people will go through that. They're very dedicated. So this is an area where 99% of the people are Buddhist, and it's not, for the most part, just a nominal adherence. It's really a part of, touches on every aspect of their lives. And if you know much about Buddhism, the ultimate goal is to escape suffering. They see that the core issue, the core problem to be solved is suffering. And the cause of suffering is desire. They say because you suffer because you want something and it's unfulfilled. And so if you get rid of all desire, you eliminate suffering. And the ultimate goal, if you do this well enough, is nirvana, which is the total non-existence. It's total extermination. And so the hope they have is to reach a level where they no longer exist, lose consciousness, and are extinct. And all of this is to avoid suffering. And what's so tragic about that as Christians? What do we know? What destiny ultimately awaits anyone who does not follow Christ? It's ultimate suffering, right? And as I watched, as I've studied and watched videos of people going about their day-to-day life and markets and everything, a verse came to mind, and you can step forward to Mark chapter 6, verse 34. And this comes after Jesus and the disciples have been engaged in heavy ministry, just were worn out, so they hadn't even had time to eat. And Jesus says, let's get in the boat, go across the lake, and kind of have some time to rest and relax and catch our breath. And what happens? It says, as Jesus came ashore, he saw the large crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he taught them many things. And as I look at Thailand, this verse just rings in my ears. The people are like sheep without a shepherd. They're wandering, and they're searching for a way to eliminate suffering while on their way to destruction. And we have the gospel, we have the good news, and we have the answer to suffering. But most of them have never even heard the name of Christ. So our ministry focus will be on evangelism, one-on-one, reaching out, building relationships, and with the goal of gathering a core group and doing church planting. Ideally, we would love to have like a Thai national church partner, somebody who wants to pastor, to partner with us early on. But like I said, Isan is a very difficult place for nationals to come and be a bivocational pastor. So the goal is to do church planting and produce indigenous churches, and to do that to leave behind well-trained leaders. And so that's going to mean a lot of discipling of our Thai partners. But also one of the things we're excited about is the city that we're targeting is called Udon Thani. It's about an hour south of the capital of Laos, which is called Vientiane. And the Lao and Thai people can kind of go back and forth across the border without any real restrictions. And so we're hoping that we will be able to have Lao pastors come down and receive, like week-long training and things like that, because once we're fully up to speed on the local dialect, it's essentially Lao. So we'll be able to actually teach in their native language. Next slide. Our ministry team is going to consist of me and Jackie and my brother and sister-in-law, Micah and Misty, and they are actually already in Chiang Mai doing language study. They'd been missionaries in China, but that door kind of closed to them. Not kind of, it closed to them, and so they shifted fields, and we're going to be partnering together in the church planning process. There's also, we're really thankful for this, there's a older missionary couple who've been in Thailand for 45 years, Bob and Gail Kraft, and so they've retired and chosen to just live out their lives in Thailand. So they won't be partnering with us in a new church plant, but they will be there for us to have a relationship with and go to for advice and counsel. So we're very grateful to have that resource nearby. And then finally, just for some prayer requests, this is a very busy time in our lives, and so please be praying that we disciple our children well through this, that we don't get so caught up in the busyness of ministry that we neglect our family and relationships. Secondly, I'll be stepping down from my job at the end of July and starting an internship at our home church. So that's a lot of transition, and there is a stipend with that position, but it's definitely not filling the full gap of my current employment. So just be praying that we'll trust the Lord through that transition and that He'll provide, as we know He will. And then also that we would just meet all of our support and training goals. Our goal is to be in Thailand this November. So there's just a lot of change between now and then. So initially it will be as students. We'll be there on a student visa to learn the language. Because Thailand has religious freedom, we can technically be there as missionaries, but the number of visas allotted to missionaries are limited, and you have to be at a very high level of proficiency with the language and things like that. So we wouldn't be qualified to even apply for one of those visas for a while. So initially it'll be as a student, and then after that, either something like teaching English. There's a few other options, potentially teaching at a school and some other things like that. But we don't have to have like a cover story or anything like that. We can be there pretty openly about what we're there to do. The plan right now is to start from scratch. Because there is so much need, if there's any existing work, we'll try to find a new area. Our goal is we don't want to go in and step on any toes, any established ministry or any national church. If they have areas they want to target, we want to be collaborative in that. So one thing I had left out, we initially were thinking to go to Chiang Mai, which is really like a big hub in Thailand, to do our language study. It looks like there's an opportunity to do our language study in Udon Thani. And so even though the first 2 years will be pretty much exclusively focused on language, if we're actually in the place where we want to serve, that'll give us a chance to do a lot of surveying and get to know the area. So we're really, really grateful for that. But so anyway, to answer your question, the goal would be to start from scratch. We would love to have a national church that has like a pastoral intern, somebody who wants to go into pastoral leadership, join us, and so that we can kind of have it nationalized right from the start, but that we'll just have to see how the Lord provides there. It will be Thai. They are distinct, but there's some mutual intelligibility, so it won't be like learning an entirely new language, but we're going to start with Thai because that's kind of the official language. It's what all the business and everything is done in. It's everybody in the country pretty much has to speak Thai, but then we want to also learn Lao so that we can really do ministry in the heart language of the people there. It's not quite as harsh as like a Muslim environment. Sometimes there's a degree of ostracization, but it's not quite the same cutting people off. There is still a lot of pressure, and people will often feel a lot of guilt for the shame and whatnot that they bring on their family. Another aspect, and some of this I think has been changing over the past few decades, but what I've read is that there was pressure as when somebody became a Christian to basically cut off all their former ties proactively, not just having their family cut them off, but then say, I'm part of this new community. And that really seemed counterproductive from a witness standpoint. and also brought like further shame. So I don't know if that was sort of a Western misunderstanding of how Thai Christians should conduct themselves, but that seems to be have kind of turned in terms of how Christians are encouraged to treat their family and so on. So from what I've heard, there's not really it'd be pretty rare that there'd be like physical danger for conversion. They went over at the end of January. And in terms of partnering in ministry, we're actually pretty excited about it. I mean, which I wouldn't have been growing up. I couldn't have. It would have been hard to imagine, but no, we're very excited because we have very complementary skills. I'm more inclined towards the administrative and kind of the planning and aspects of it, and want to do the day-to-day pastoring, whereas he's never meets a stranger, is very enthusiastic, helps get people excited, and in terms of like leading events and men's ministries and things like that, and also supplementing by preaching and whatnot. So at the moment, our desires in ministry and our skills, I think, are well aligned to partner together. Yeah, so they'll finish their language school in Chiang Mai and then move over. Initially, we were looking at homeschooling because there's a international school. It's a Christian school, but international school in Bangkok that's big, well-known. They actually chose to plant a new school in Udon Thani about a little over a year ago, I guess about 2 years ago now. We had heard about it, but kind of ruled it out because it's extremely expensive. And then one of the other missionaries told us, he was on the board, and he said, we actually put it there to help bring missionaries to the area because it's such an underserved area. And we charge this much to expats and business executives and whatnot, and that subsidizes for missionaries. And so it's pretty reasonable tuition. And so we're going to have them at it's an American style school, but 70% of the students are Thai. So we're excited that they'll have Thai friends, but like Nathan, especially being he'll be 11 years old before we go over there. That was his biggest concern, and there were a lot of trepidation about, will I be able to make friends? You have the language barrier. You also have school time, so there's limited time to make connections. And so just feel very blessed that the Lord opened up that door.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's also significant because very often missionary wives end up feeling kind of on the outside of the ministry because with homeschooling and other things, it's often they don't learn the language. And can kind of, it's a very important role to be there and raise the family, but can feel like they're not a proactive part of the ministry. So I know the answer to some of that in talking to other missionaries. There's a certain automatic level of deference and respect and assumption that you have a certain level of education and wealth and all that, and all those things factor into respect. Whether it should or shouldn't is kind of it doesn't matter. That's the reality. And so some of that will come with being an American there. Learning the language, being a student, that won't be seen as a negative. If anything, they really appreciate when you take the time to learn the language. Because Thailand, our region only gets about 1% of the tourism, but Thailand as a whole gets 40 million tourist visitors a year. So a lot of people, especially in the south, speak English pretty well. And so you can get by. I mean, many expats move there and never learn the language at all. And so they really respect it and appreciate when, as a Westerner, you come in and you try to speak the language. And so that part, I think, if anything, will open doors. And then because of my background with building automation, I may still do some of that kind of work because there is a certain amount of respect for like, oh, you do controls consulting or whatever the thing. So it'd be more, if that will enhance the ministry, then I'll do that. We'll just kind of have to understand or learn that when we get there. Well, one of the big ones that's been on my mind was trying to finish up seminary while doing all this other stuff. And so that's actually a praise at this point that have kind of moved on and I guess mostly just having, right now we're very excited about going. It's been a long time coming. It's been our plan since we got married to serve overseas. And so right now it all feels like upside. And we know that we know that that's not the case. Like, we know it's going to be hard at times, but just that we would be preparing our hearts to kind of for the long haul. And I think that's one way that we were frustrated at times that it's taken us so long to get to this point of leaving for the field, but we've seen how God has used, our experience in ministry here and just putting us through some trials and hardships and other things to grow us. And so I think we're better equipped to endure hard times or maybe ministry that doesn't feel particularly fruitful and things like that, but just that we would, that the Lord would be preparing the ground, but also just preparing our hearts to be faithful through hard times. It's Thailand in particular is relatively stable. I mean, they've had, I think, 17 constitutions in the past 100 years and like 6 military coups, but it's mostly been, I think they've all been bloodless. And, so it's, even though there have been some times of turmoil, it's not been like war. Thailand as a kingdom it's been an independent kingdom since 1238. So they're very proud of their national heritage. There's the saying, to be Thai is to be Buddhist. And so like there's a lot about the Thai identity that's, their personal identity is wrapped up in being Thai. And so that, for whatever reason, Thailand itself has been pretty stable. Myanmar to the west is going through a lot of turmoil, potential, I think, genocide and so on. Laos is still pretty closed communist country, but as far as I know, it's politically stable. So I don't know if that answers your question, but Thailand as a whole is pretty stable. Yes?
Where are you guys on funding?
We have to raise two kind of buckets. One is like one-time expenses to get there, outfit a house, buy a vehicle, and all that. And praise the Lord, we're almost 100% of that. That's like $60,000 for language study and all the other stuff that kind of goes into it. And so pretty much fully funded there. And then our monthly recurring, we're at about 60% of where we need to be. We're shooting for this November. But that's flexible. It's contingent on when we're funded. So between now and whenever we leave, we're going to be working on the internship at my church, but that's to prepare me for the field. So part of that is flexibility to speak with churches and other potential supporters and stuff. Yeah, so ABWE provides oversight, and they do all the administrative work and insurance, and so they really kind of do the heavy lifting in terms of oversight and partner with our churches. So yes, all the money is sent through the mission, and then they make sure that we're being honest with our taxes and everything else. So, but it doesn't have to be through the website. There's other ways of handling it, but yeah, it's all through the mission. So my brother and sister-in-law are with our organization. They were with a different organization in China, but since we wanted to partner in the ministry and stuff, it came under the same umbrella. So we'll be kind of under the same field hierarchy and everything. As far as standard of living, our board tries to set it to where it's not extravagant for the area, but interestingly, several of the missionaries have told us the people don't really respect it if you just live at, say, the median level, because this kind of gets into their belief. But I don't know how many of you have heard that, in Asia, it's common to flaunt your wealth. People, they like the new flashy thing and show it. Well, part of that is, especially in Thailand with Theravada Buddhism, it's seen that your actions are solely responsible for your, how things wind up in your next existence. And so success isn't just success, it's also, I am a spiritually good person, a spiritually superior person. And so there's a certain amount of showing it. And so if you come in too low, it can be misunderstood as what's wrong with you. So that's also a challenge when it comes to the gospel, because they also, when you present Christ, it's like he was born into a lowly position, died on a cross. These are all things that to them evoke bad karma. But anyway, so that's a factor in terms of standard of living. But our goal is not to be extravagant, but also kind of somewhere in the in the median or lower end for expats, I guess. No, our goal is definitely to live around Thai people. So it's less because Isan and the Northeast in general, there are far fewer expats than other parts of the country. So like in Chiang Mai, there are Western style subdivisions, gated communities. Like you can basically have an American style house in a subdivision with a pool and everything else. And you're pretty much gated off from Thais in that scenario. In Isan, it's less that way. It's less built up around Western culture. But even so, our goal is to find, during that first 2 years, we'll be figuring it out. But when we figure out where we want to do ministry, our goal would be to live among the Thai people that we want to minister to. It's a language program, I think, associated with a university. In this one, it's an independent. Okay. Yeah. So in this case, Thailand, you have to be pretty careful because one of the ways to have a visa is through language study. And so there were kind of like these visa mills where you wouldn't actually learn the language. And so that's been one of the things we're kind of relying on our coworkers on the field, because all of our ABWE coworkers are quite proficient in the language, and they've really stressed that that's important to ministry. And so we're kind of relying on them to evaluate the language program. So there are good and bad independent language programs. Some of the university programs aren't quite as good because they tend to just push through on a particular schedule, and you don't necessarily learn it. So we'll be doing language study, but we'll also probably be supplementing with tutoring, and especially once you get past the first kind of 2 main courses, then it's almost all supplemented through tutoring. And the Thai language has 5 tones, so depending on the pitch, or the tone that you use with a word, it may mean up to 5 completely different meanings. So it's not just a different nuance. It's like, if I say it with the wrong inflection, it's not the word I meant to say. So it takes some time just to tune your ear to even hearing those differences, and especially learning to speak it.